im se svima, i malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima, dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati.
Pozdrav, dragi narode, dobrodošli u još jednu epizodu Slobodni. Prošli vikend, točnije ne znam kad će biti ova emisija emitirana, ali uglavnom bila je velika konferencija u Bukureštu pod nazivom International Crisis Summit 4. To se prije nazivao International COVID Summit i to su bila 3 do sada. Prošli je bio u Briselu, prije toga u Rimu. A ovaj posljednji je promijenio malo ime u Crisis umjesto COVID zato što su se i druge teme otvorile, stoga je potrebno razgovarati u puno širem kontekstu. Imao sam čast sudjelovati na tom summitu, ali istovremeno imam danas priliku prezentirati jednog od govornika koji je iznio vrlo zanimljiva istraživanja, odnosno njegova zapažanja o tome u kakvom svijetu živimo i koje političko-socijalno uređenje je upravo ono kojem svjedočimo svakodnevno. Moj gost je gospodin Nick Hudson. Hello, Mr. Hudson. Welcome to our Croatian show.
It's wonderful to be with you, and hello to your viewers.
Can you tell us who is Nick Hudson?
Yes, the short answer is that by occupation, I run a private equity firm. So I'm a private equity investor. By qualification, I am an actuary, which is an insurance mathematician. So I have a strong background in data science and modeling. And then by night, I'm the chairman of an organization called PANDA, Pandemics, Data and Analytics, that was established right at the beginning of the COVID phenomenon in response to the emerging outbreak of lockdown. And we set ourselves up to ask a simple question, which is, why were we locking down without having performed any type of cost-benefit analysis? And I had no idea at the time, but that fledgling organization, which really consisted of me and a handful of other professionals, including an immunologist and a lawyer and an economist, we're beginning an organization that has subsequently grown, is now an international organization that has been taking a close look at all aspects of the COVID phenomenon and challenging the conventional narrative, which we believe to be a pack of lies.
Well, you became famous because from the first moment you came out with data and you showed that there was no reason for locking down. There was a completely wrong way to calculate how many we have sick people, how many cases, and infection fatality rate. Everything was wrong from the start. Can you say just a few words about this?
Yes, you're not exaggerating at all. It's, I believe, accurate to say that no element of the conventional narrative around the COVID phenomenon is accurate. So, as we can start with the early observation that we had, which is that the virus presented essentially negligible risk to even vaguely healthy people under the age of 70. This was not a material public health threat. Then that, none of the guidelines that had been in place in some cases for many decades had ever suggested the idea of quarantining healthy people, which is how they referred to lockdown, before the term was invented in 2020 or shortly there before. And also a lot of the stories that were told, this business of asymptomatic transmission, this business of lockdowns actually saving lives, the business of masks being effective, all of these things were false. Even the way we were collecting the data, this idea that simply on the basis of a positive PCR test, it was enough to call somebody a case of a disease, that was completely wrong. You shouldn't even be calling them a case of an infection. So almost everything pretty much everything we were told was false. And the more we studied, the more of these false claims we encountered, and the more censorship we confronted in our effort to bring fact and data into the discussion. Because none of these media claims and political claims were ever substantiated by data. They were all completely without a basis in conventional epidemiology, conventional medicine, conventional economics. This was just a situation where all the textbooks were thrown out and the world went mad.
Well, you noticed from the start something went wrong, but they continue, and they are continuing to pressing people, even to blackmail them to take vaccine. And now, just a few days ago, there was a press conference in Brussels, and there is a letter from EMA, European Medical Agency, and they confirm it. They never give a permission for the vaccine to stop spreading, because they knew from the start that this spreading cannot be stopped by the vaccines. But our politicians continue to push us to make propaganda and to blackmail with COVID passports and everything else to take these vaccines, because they want herd immunity with vaccines. What are your thoughts about their acting, about their policies?
Look, there are a number of important things to understand about the vaccines. I mean, the one that has been most widely used around the world is the Pfizer vaccine. So maybe what we should do in the interest of time is just focus on that one. And there, the first important thing to know is that the manufacturer's trials were fraudulent. We are dealing with a situation where there's been a whistleblower. That whistleblower has gone to court. The testimony stood up. The defense that Pfizer and the FDA advanced was that there was no case to respond to, because they had never promised the Department of Defense, with whom they originally contracted to supply vaccines, that the vaccine would be safe and effective. So they didn't even try and defend against the allegation of fraud in the companies that were to which the conducting of the trial was outsourced. The next thing to understand is that none of the media claims were actually supportable by the trial results, because the trials never tested efficacy of the vaccine against hospitalization or against mortality or against all-cause incurrence of COVID-like symptoms. They merely reported one very marginal finding, that the COVID symptoms were less likely to occur in conjunction with a positive PCR test. Meanwhile, the reality behind the actual clinical outcomes, the ones that any sensible person would care about, is that people in the vaccine arm of the trials were more likely to incur all-cause severe illness, all-cause hospitalization, and all-cause mortality. And these facts were all completely ignored by politicians, by regulating authorities, by the media. And this ridiculous claim went out that the vaccine was, there were various extents to which the claim was exaggerated, but that it protected you against hospitalization and death. Those claims were false. More concerning was this idea that the vaccines would stop the virus, that it was a pandemic of the unvaccinated, that the vaccines would stop transmission and infection. There was absolutely no reason to expect this to be the case. The mechanism of action of the vaccine doesn't even suggest at all that it would stop transmission. It's a ridiculous idea. Yet the word went out through media with the help of people like Anthony Fauci, Walensky, Bulla, the CEO of Pfizer. The word went out to citizens all over the world that the vaccines would stop transmission. And it was on the basis of that several countries or companies or organizations began to embark on vaccine mandates. The only basis for mandating a vaccine, even if we are prepared to put aside conventions regarding human rights and medical treatment, even if we ignore those, the only basis you can come up with for mandating a vaccine is the basis that it stops transmission. But that claim was false. So there was never, ever any basis for mandating a vaccine or for insisting on a vaccine passport or preventing a person from traveling, because at the very most, the vaccine only protects you, doesn't protect anybody else. And even that claim that it protects you is substantively false, because it protects you from getting a mild case of COVID in conjunction with a positive PCR test. But who cares about that if it's more likely that you end up in hospital, die, or get severe disease? So it's only describable as a fraud, and one that drew in the great majority of Western institutions of medicine, including universities and regulatory organizations. And we can see very clearly why that process of drawing those institutions into the lie came about, and that is because they are all handsomely funded by vaccine stakeholders and pharmaceutical firms.
Yes, and then we coming here in a topic what you've been describing in Bucharest. It seems that they were ruling the whole world on the same way, and now in the future they want also to implement that WHO have more authority for the future pandemics. And you are talking about the model of new society, what would they like to implement. Can you tell us about this?
Sure. It's very important, we believe, to not see COVID as a medical or epidemiological phenomenon. COVID is front and center a political phenomenon. What we've seen is that the perceived threat of the deadly virus was used to beat people into fear and submission. And under those conditions, there was an enormous assault on a wide range of civil liberties and on human agency in general. And it's part of a broader program that is identifiable in multiple domains, not merely the domain of public health and medicine, but in economics, in information technology, and many other fields. We can see that there's this inexorable and ongoing drive towards acute centralization and the erosion of individual liberties and human rights. So my talk in Bucharest focused on the origins of that phenomenon of centralization and on what ought to be done about that. And so that was how I came to be speaking there. It was on the final day of the conference, trying to sort of summarize the challenge that human beings all over the planet face, and that was the point of the talk.
Yes, and now we see here, in the present moment, European Union was established on a model of subsidiarity. That means they don't want for central government to have a strong power. They want that all problems that can be solved on a lower level stay there. But we are now witnessing just a week ago that European Parliament now going towards this more centralized power, and now this power of veto is not any longer existing. That means small countries can be overruled by the bigger countries. And if we knew from the start, I'm not sure how many nations would agree to go in this kind of unity. Can you explain us what this means?
Yes, I mean, this is an example of the process that I'm pointing towards, that wherever you look, whether it's in the United States or in Europe or at the level of the Geneva organizations or the Bretton Woods organizations, the World Bank and the International Monetary Forum, the IMF, those organizations are all showing a tendency to centralize more and more. The term subsidiarity that you mentioned was a term that was very current in the late 1980s. You saw it being given great prominence by the then Catholic Pope, John Paul II. And it was a term that was used in the foundational documents of the European Union there was, as you say, a great concern that nations, individual cultures and languages would be trodden upon if under the project of the European Union. And so the foundational documents really reflected a commitment to not letting that happen. But over time, what we saw is that the term began to be referenced less and less. And so you see the word subsidiarity appearing a lot in the 1980s, much less in the 1990s, and then almost not at all from 2000 onwards. And this brilliant idea of not taking decisions at a more central location than is necessary fell by the wayside. But it is a central ethical admonishment. It's an economically sensible way of structuring things. It's a politically sensible way of structuring things. Centralization is simply a bad idea, and we know why it's a bad idea. I opened my talk in Bucharest by referring to the concept of complexity. Almost anything that we struggle with in our lives is some element of a complex system, whether we're dealing with an epidemic or a society or an immune system or an ecological system. Those are examples of complex systems. And you can't control or manage a complex system or predict its evolution by way of performing calculations and acts of deductive reasoning. The only way we know of to modify complex systems in a way that is beneficial to human beings is the process of gradual conjecture and criticism, also known as trial and error. So you have to take an evolutionary approach to modifying complex systems. And the reason for this is we never know whether our actions won't have second-order effects or unforeseen consequences that actually cause things to deteriorate rather than improve as we originally expected. And so you need to test things gradually and on the margin when you are dealing with a complex phenomenon. Otherwise, the scope exists for disastrous outcomes. And that's a well-known philosophical and idea from the field called the theory of knowledge or epistemology. That the source of all knowledge creation, the source of all solutions under conditions of complexity, is a process of evolutionary modification. And in order for a process of evolutionary modification to take place, you need conditions of freedom. You have to allow multiple attempts, multiple conjectures, multiple trials to be conducted. And if you're running the world under a centralist scheme, what you are doing is implementing top-down rule by decree. And by its very nature, centralism therefore outlaws the process of evolutionary change and of conjecture and criticism. And it destroys the mechanism of error correction that is built into bottom-up systems, decentralized systems, systems that comply with the construct of subsidiarity.
And they want this implement on all levels, in the public health, in food, in a financial economic system, in education. Can you explain us how they are planning to do this?
Yes, well, I mean, let's just start. In public health, what we're seeing is the emergence of this World Health Organization Accord and a set of regulations, a set of amendments to the international health regulations. And they're really terrible. They make for terrible reading, those amendments, because you see them crossing out references to human rights and human dignity, to civil liberties, and replacing it with concepts such as the greater good or the need for a coordinated response, a global response to a pandemic. And all of the principles that were foundational to the very establishment of the World Health Organization itself, all the principles that are enshrined in such documents as the Syracuse Principles, the Alma Ata document that was foundational for the World Health Organization, the Nuremberg Code, all number of human rights codes and provisions talk to exactly the opposite of what that set of amendments and that accord are trying to achieve. And what they in effect do is rob individual nations of their sovereignty and place the entire running of national societies in the hands of the World Health Organization, merely in response to the Director General of that organization deciding that there is a threat of a pandemic. He doesn't have to prove that there is actually a pandemic or get the consent of the member organizations or of any committee. He can just decide of his own accord that there is a potential threat of a pandemic. And from then on, every single country that has signed these regulations and this accord is bound by those documents to implement whatever recommendations the World Health Organization makes. So that's public health for you. In the allied area of medicine, what we see is that the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship is now being purposefully violated. In fact, it's being violated as a compulsory matter by two emerging strands of thought. The one is the notion of treatment of patients according to a protocol. So rather than a doctor following his judgment, which comes from his studies and his years of experience with other patients, he must now follow a protocol that's determined by a central medical board or a chain of hospitals or the World Health Organization or whatever. So there's a kind of centralization in terms of permissible treatment. And there's also a tyranny that is euphemized by the term evidence-based medicine. Now, that sounds like a good thing. What's wrong with evidence and what's wrong with basing your medicine on evidence? But what it's really about is having a one-size-fits-all perspective on what constitutes good evidence and what constitutes bad evidence, and forcing a single worldview upon the global medical profession.
And they're calling this One Health concept.
Yes, the World Health Organization refers to all of this as the One Health concept, and what they try to do is to go further than simple public health involvement, and to try and link the idea of the global climate and ecology and the well-being of animals and the maintenance of animals and safety of animals and so on, all under the one umbrella of this One Health construct, which all countries in the world are meant to sign up to, no matter what their particular circumstances are. And it's a ridiculous notion. Here I live in South Africa. We have completely different priorities when it comes to healthcare. Our main priorities are relating to nutrition and obesity. We don't have a lot of old people. So a disease like COVID, for example, presents very little risk to the general population.
And next question is
also looking.
Yeah. And next question is coming now to this financial and economical way, how they're going to rule. They are planning to do lots of centralization. We are now facing that we have decentralized financial system, but it seems to they like to change it. What do you think about this?
Yes. I mean, the great promise of the cryptocurrency developments is that they afford the possibility to decentralize the world of money, to remove entirely the role of these kleptocratic organizations called central banks, because that's what they are. They're systems of theft. And so there was great promise in digital currencies to offer a way to decentralize, to remove private and public control of our monetary systems. But what is being advocated for at a global level by governments, all of a sudden, all acting at the same time, and by the IMF and the World Bank, is a move towards programmable central bank digital currencies. And there are now more than 100 countries around the world which all of a sudden, out of nowhere, never having mentioned this in any election manifestos or discussed any of this in Parliament, are all simultaneously, by coincidence, working on programmable central bank digital
Coincidence,
currencies,
absolutely.
either trialing them or doing the blueprints for them.
Yeah,
And this is quite clearly not a coincidence, and it's quite clearly not originating from the concerns of individual countries.
yeah, for sure it is not made in national policies, because if we're going to centralize everything on a global level, we are now in European Union, we are in Eurozone also. That means all power for our currency in Croatia is in the hands of European Central Bank. And nobody in Croatia voted for this. Nobody was asking anybody, are we want to have this digital centralized currency? But now we are facing this. That means that for sure it's not a result of some national policy. It's of course a result of central bank agreement. What they want to accomplish with this?
Well, it goes again to this question of centralization, and what comes with a centralized system is the need to control. You can't maintain a centralized polity without controlling to a great deal all the members of that polity. And the reason that programmable central bank digital currencies are an enticing instrument for would-be centralizers is they hold the key to penalizing people who dissent or who behave in ways that are not compatible with these centralized objectives. You can have your money turned off or confiscated or restricted, your spending, the range of items that you may spend your money on, restricted in one or another way. And this could be pursuant to your standing in terms of a social credit system, such as the ones that have been adopted in certain parts of China. This could be linked to your carbon dioxide footprint. It could be linked to your willingness to take whatever vaccines are being mandated. It could be linked to your willingness to wear a mask when you walk outside, the distance that you move away from your house, whether you buy meat instead of vegetables. All sorts of things could be restricted in the hands of if we allow our currencies to be placed in the hands of governments. So that's the concern. But you also asked about the more broad economic issues. I mean, in general, what we see is this kind of idea out there, motivated by the very stupid doctrine of modern monetary theory, that it doesn't matter how much our governments borrow, that's inconsequential. They like to say things like it's all just debt to ourselves, so it doesn't matter. And bear in mind that when they borrow, they have a tendency to spend, and very quickly. And so what's happening is they're effectively mortgaging all of our futures. It's a program of global theft being undertaken on a massive construct. And what you find is that economists who question the wisdom of modern monetary theory are uninvited from places like the World Economic Forum, are not invited to speak on television for CNN, don't get their articles published in the New York Times, and so on. So there's even a centralization process going on in permissible economic theory with a suppression of dissenting voices.
Yeah, one of the tools will be ESG, environmental social governing. That will be standard that every company has to use it for, we can say, protection our climate.
Yeah. And what ESG tries to do is a form of what's called stakeholder governance, where they attempt to replace the set of trade-offs between different stakeholders that it exists naturally in the real economy under the dispensation of shareholder-based governance. They try to replace those natural economic trade-offs with artificial ones, where they give certain privileged status to various stakeholders, and those stakeholders could be people or a nebulous construct like the environment, or they even say it in the name, ESG. There's what does the S stand for there? Oh, it's social. Environmental, social, and governance scorecard. So they're replacing the natural trade-off between pleasing one customer or another customer, or one supplier or another supplier, with a set of privileged stakeholder classes, if you like. So it's an economically nonsensical idea that's now being forced down the throats of companies and businessmen all around the world, and in very much a global fashion, once again highly centralized and with all sorts of elaborate penalties. You might be excluded from the capital markets. You might find yourself being fined or investigated. You might find that you are unable to do business with certain other companies or bank across borders or something like that. So there really is a story around ESG, as there is around with that other three-letter acronym DEI, diversity, diversity, inclusivity, and equity. And that's another sort of nonsensical set of things that sound good. You know, what's wrong with being social and having good governance and looking after the environment and looking after your diversity and being equitable and being inclusive? There's nothing wrong with these things, really, if you approach them in terms of their narrow dictionary definitions. But these terms mean much more than their dictionary definitions to these centralizing people, and they're used as methods to corral corporations and push them in a certain direction, an ideological position. So it's economic, it's financial, it's corporate that we see this centralizing tendency. And you correctly mentioned food. We haven't touched on that yet.
Yeah.
But if you look at what's going on globally, there's a massive push to consolidate farms all over the world and to use identical seed stocks at all of these farms and to switch the land use from grazing to agriculture to produce. And that is again just based on this idea linked to climate crisis fears that cows by burping contribute to global warming.
We are just facing this crisis in Croatia. We had now crisis with African plague or African fever, swine fever. And also we are now facing additional problems with other food chains, like similar what we have in Netherlands. In Netherlands, they want to cut off 50% of their land to take from the government. And I had an interview also, I had one documentary named Nitrogen 2000. And inside directly, when this farmer said, look, okay, if you think that my cows are a problem, I'll give you cows, but I'll stay on my land. They said, no, we want your land, not only cows. They are admitting, they are not hiding their policy. And we are facing the same thing in other countries and now also in Croatia. That means they want to centralize production of food and also add some additional things in this new food chain. And these are the bugs. We have to eat bugs, they said, because it's a good protein. What do you think? Are you going to eat bugs?
I'm not going to be eating any bugs. I think, Andrea, if you want to eat the bugs, I'm not going to stop you. I believe in free choice.
For sure.
So they want you to eat the bugs. So maybe you should just listen to them. I don't know. Maybe it's fair. Leave all the meat for them to eat, and you eat the bugs. That sounds fair to me.
Absolutely. Well, let's get serious, because really I couldn't say nothing else than that this future plannings from their side are totally, crazy. But okay, let's continue. They also want to centralize information, databases, digitalization. All these tools are used for the same purpose.
Yes. And it's dressed up as something that's there to help you. They first have to manufacture, and maybe this is a good time just to explain to your viewers when you referred to Hudson's razor.
Yeah, that's important. Okay, you became famous for a Hudson's razor. everybody in the world
Yes.
was asking me, who is this guy? This is brilliant what he said. Okay, repeat us again. What is Hudson's
Okay.
razor?
So Hudson's razor is a rule of thumb or a heuristic that goes as follows. Any problem that is, one, presented as a global problem, two, admitting only global solutions, and three, amid an environment where dissent is suppressed, is a scam. So those are the three conditions. A problem presented as a global crisis, admitting only global solutions, amid suppression of dissent. If you tick those three boxes, then you are definitively dealing with a scam. It's very simple. So the COVID phenomenon ticks those boxes. Anybody who dissented against the set of solutions that was proposed on a global basis for COVID was censored and smeared and cancelled, lost their jobs, lost their access to media and social media.
Call the names.
So that ticks the box. Sorry?
Call by names like anti-vaxxers
Yes.
and other far right,
And the same thing.
anti-Semite.
Yeah, far right, anti-vaxxer, COVID denier, all of these stupid terms.
That's right.
And the same thing happens with this whole climate crisis scam. As soon as you put your hand up, if you're a climate scientist and you say, look, I don't think that anthropogenic CO2 is causing a threatening amount of global warming. I don't think that the cure is any better than the disease. I would like to speak out and propose that we don't do any of this net zero stuff. That person will lose their funding, lose their job, be cancelled, be kicked out of their university, their books will be banned, their articles will not be published. And so we know straight away that the climate change crisis is also a complete and utter scam. And I'm really challenging people on this one. If you believe that nonsense, then you are the most uncommercial person in the world. It's not possible to watch what happens to scientists who dissent and to believe that the people on the other side of the argument who are doing the cancelling and doing the smearing and doing the censorship have your interests at heart. Censorship has never been the tool used by the good guys. Never in history. It's never the good guys who censor people. So if you can't see that, then I'm sorry. Then you deserve to lose all of your freedoms. You deserve to have a terrible life because you are not using your God-given brain. And it's just a flatly uncommercial, immature perspective to take that the climate change crisis, as it's presented, is a valid construct. It's pathetic. It's not valid at all.
Yeah, maybe I would like just add one thing, please. When you mentioned that they call us names, because Amo was the one also who was asking questions. They change everything around us, and also very important because people are not aware. They change your biography in Wikipedia. Everybody thinks that when you come to Wikipedia, you find out everything. No, editors of Wikipedia are also doing the same thing. They're censoring and changing our biographies of people who are making questions.
Well, the most egregious case of this that I've come across is the biography of Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg, who was the person who had the most to do with blowing the whistle on the 2009 fake pandemic of H1N1 influenza. And he performed a heroic role in exposing the efforts of the World Health Organization to fake a pandemic and launch a mass vaccination program. He was celebrated for his role in that. And this is not some kind of conspiracy theory. Those events happened. They were reported in back then in the media that was much more honest than it is today. And his role was recognized in Parliament. So it was all factual what he'd done. But this time around, what they did was even before he'd said anything about the COVID phenomenon, they went and edited his Wikipedia entry to paint him as some kind of freak. Yeah. So that was, before he'd said anything. That's how criminal and immoral these people are.
And whoever wants to see, I had an interview with Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg, and just a few weeks ago, they can take a look. We were talking about all these things. There is an additional thing that they want to centralize is sources of energy. That they say that we need to change energy that we're using because of, again, climate changes, again, protecting environment and everything else. And they want to centralize source of energy.
Yes, it's the source of the energy and also the regulation of consumption of energy. And there are a variety of tools that I think they intend to deploy in order to achieve this. So the first one would be taxes on the use of carbon-based fuels, and of course the velvet aspect of all of that, which is the subsidies for so-called renewables, which are not really renewable at all. But so it's in terms of the incentives and sticks that they use around energy types or energy sources, but then also around total energy consumption in the form of carbon footprints and that kind of situation, and in terms of freedom of movement. So, for example, constructs such as the 15-minute city are in effect ways to prevent you from spending a lot of energy getting yourself from A to B. They want to just confine you to a small geographic region in the interest of saving the world from a deadly molecule. So the centralization on the environmental side of things, it's not even really correctly called environmental. I mean, this is just a fabricated climate crisis. It's got nothing to do with the environment. In fact, most of the measures undertaken by these net zero freaks are bad for the environment. If you look at,
I have to say that mayor of our city, capital city, Zagreb, one of his colleagues had a great idea how to make these 15-minute cities to function. Well, he suggested that they should do nothing and make crowd in the city so huge that people will give up to use cars.
Yes, we saw a similar situation in London recently, where they just start blocking off roads to make it less and less convenient to drive in the city, in the hopes that people will give up using their cars and eventually leave the city, I would imagine, or just get comfortable with staying at home all the time with their eyes glued to their various screens, as envisaged by that, the name of that little freak, Yuval Noah Harari, who works for the World Economic Forum and publishes those terribly childish books with such shallow predictions and analysis. He always describes the future human as somebody who basically is almost like being plugged into the matrix, sits at home consuming a cocktail of drugs
and video games. He said drugs and video games. Yeah. Well,
beautiful concept.
Absolutely.
Everybody wants that.
Yes. And also for that, they need to change education, because future generation has to be indoctrinated in this same policy and ideology.
Yeah, in many ways, I think education is one of the first things that became centralized. You saw the United Nations through UNICEF moving to standardize the education syllabus worldwide and to include all sorts of objectives that move away from the direction of encouraging critical thinking and towards flat regurgitation and narrowly occupation-based type education, called outcomes-based education in some countries. And what these programs do is they take away people's abilities to challenge authority, because their critical thinking capacity is reduced. And I think that's been the story for a couple of decades now. I sometimes look at youngsters who emerge from the education system, particularly in the Anglophone countries, and scratch my head, because it's just astounding how little they know about the world and how uninclined they are to stretch themselves when it comes to solving problems and thinking through things in a practical and insightful fashion.
Yeah, and we didn't mention one important concept, what they are giving, it's degrowth. that think that our growth is limited, and we have to make the growth of completely economy and everything in the world. And where this bringing us?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because I think what the notion of degrowth and the fact that we see it being used in speeches and articles with increasing frequency reflects the fact that they know very well that what I started off by saying is true, that under conditions of complexity, centralization is incompatible with solving problems and therefore with economic growth. If you do not have, it's economic growth only comes from knowledge growth. And if you shut off the mechanisms of knowledge growth by centralizing all systems that you can get your hands on, then what you do is you cut off economic growth. And in fact, we expect it to go backwards because as it's always done all over the world, when power is consolidated and centralized and an authoritarian system emerges, you see great deprivation emerge and negative growth. And so I think they know very well that their plans are incompatible with growth and therefore incompatible with human flourishing. And so they have to begin messaging to get a kind of adoption of a level of comfort with this idea that we're going to experience something called degrowth. They don't present it in terms of the personal impact that's going to have on you. They just present it as a kind of nebulous term that's out there. That was sort of, okay, we're going to just have to get accustomed to a world without growth. That's how it's being presented right now. But make no mistake, that means a world with less leisure, less ability to consume, less ability to own things and to enjoy the fruits of your labor. That's what degrowth means.
Yeah, and much more poor people in the future. And how this woke agenda or ideology fit in this whole concept?
Well, let's combine that idea, more poor people in the world. Yes, the number of poor people in the world went up by 167 million is the estimate of the biggest NGO in the world that tracks starvation. There were 167 million more people at risk of starvation on the basis of what happened in terms of lockdowns in 2020. And subsequent to that, the number's gone up even more. So we've more than doubled the number of people in the world at risk of starvation in 3 short years. And you need to not be under any illusions. All of the other methods of centralization are just like lockdown. They're locked down by another term, and they will cause similar deprivation, whether it's reduced energy budgets or less quality education or central bank digital currencies. All of these things we've been speaking about will result in an increase in levels of poverty. And so the woke agenda really, seen in that light, looks particularly sinister. The woke agenda, if I can summarize it, is this idea that facts don't matter and that reality is a matter of personal opinion, or what they like to call identity. It's the idea that people's value should be assessed in terms of where they stand in a victimhood hierarchy, with adult white men at the bottom of the hierarchy and, I don't know, lesbian, black, disabled, transgender women at the top. And this kind of idea that the value of a human being is assessed in terms of some externally fabricated ranking of prejudice. And it's a completely stupid framework. I think some of the adherents are motivated by the genuine belief that tolerance and is a virtue, and that equality is a virtue, but neither tolerance nor equality are virtues that can be expressed by us, are fundamentally disconnected from reality, incoherent, and themselves prejudicial. So it's just a very bad manifestation in our world. I mean, on my recent trip to Romania to deliver this talk, I must say how pleasantly surprised I was. Well, not surprised, but how striking it was that woke culture has not been nearly as widely adopted in Romania and, as I understand it, in the rest of Eastern Europe, as it has been in places like America and the United Kingdom and Australia and Canada in particular. But I think the woke agenda is sort of a full expression of, first of all, a kind of naivety and illusory belief in the virtues of centralization and of top-down ethics, if you like.
What is your message for people who doesn't agree with these policies, who doesn't want to continue with these global policies about all things that we mentioned today? How to fight against it?
Well, keep on speaking out if you are, and start speaking out if you aren't. And if you can't speak out because of the organization you work in, then you need to have a very serious think. You need to think about how much you value your independence. If you can't even speak your mind, then you are a slave. And I like people to think very hard about whether it isn't worth taking a significant cut in income or in net asset value now, rather than finding that they get a permanent such cut down the line that they can't do anything about because there haven't been enough people to overthrow those who would force us down this path of centralization. So that's the most important thing I think that the majority of people right now can do, is to give serious consideration to what it would take for them to put themselves in a position where they can speak their minds freely. Until they get to that point, there are two things that won't happen. One is that they won't be able to contribute effectively to any resistance to this direction of travel. And the second thing is that they themselves will not be put in a position where their own flourishing can become a multi-year project. Because without independence, there is no human flourishing.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. And it was really a pleasure to talk with you and to see your observation about this global agenda. And I hope I see you soon.
Likewise, Andrea. Cheers.
Cheers. Evo, dragi narode, čuli ste malo razmišljanja iz cijelog svijeta. Dakle, jako je važno zato što ovo što se događa u Hrvatskoj možemo primijetiti bilo gdje na svijetu. Dakle, kao što smo spomenuli ovdje, bilo je to u Bukureštu prošli tjedan. Odnosno, kad se bude ova emisija emitirala, to će biti taman tjedan dana iza toga. Idući vikend, dakle 1. prosinca, se događa nešto slično u Hrvatskom parlamentu, odnosno Hrvatskom saboru. Također dolaze stručnjaci iz cijelog svijeta razgovarati o bitnim temama, a teme će biti među ostalima i Svjetska zdravstvena organizacija i Central Bank Digital Currency i nova legislativa u Europskoj uniji, a posebno ćemo razgovarati i obratiti pažnju na kontaminaciju plazmida DNA i SV40 koja je pronađena u cjepivima za koje nam nisu rekli. I također o onome što svjedočimo, to su turbokarcinomi kojih je sve više, a upozoreni smo na vrijeme da je upravo moguće da rezultat masovnog cijepljenja bude turbokarcinomi. Stoga će svjetski stručnjaci o tome razgovarati u Hrvatskom saboru 1. prosinca. Hvala vam lijepo na pažnji i vidimo se uskoro u jednoj od sljedećih epizoda Slobodni.
Nitko vas neće natjerati da se poklonite zvijeri, učinit ćete to svoje voljno, odbacujući vjeru. Bićete laka meta za zvijeri, jer se niste podredili vjeri. Ako se ne podredite vjeri, podredit ćete se zvijeri. Toliko ćete se suobličiti sa ovim svijetom, da nećete ni prepoznati da ste u zabludi. Biće to najveća demonska prevara ikada i pravedno zaslužena osuda nad nepokajanim grešnicima.